We are starting with this lesson of ITF, right? See, what we actually have to understand in the chapter is that the relation between the trigonometric functions what you have studied with inverse trigonometric function. Now, the link for trigonometric and inverse trigonometric function is the same as the function and its inverse, right? Last chapter you have learned about inverse function, correct? The relation function, how inverse function is there. So you know that every function, any function you take, it has two important things. One is a domain, correct? And one more is a range. See, when we talk about domain and range, domain is what? The values what the function can take. And range is what the function is going to give as an output, correct? So, any function you take, whether it's a trigonometric function or an inverse trigonometric function, each and every function has a domain and a range. Well and good. So, whenever we talk about domain, we'll start with a very basic function, that is sine function. Okay, so these are basic concepts to understand ITF. I would say ITF meaning inverse trigonometric function. I would say these are like prerequisites. Fine. So if you have an inverse trigonometric function, what all values it can actually take, basically its domain, and what all values it can give, basically the range. Fine. Now, if you take the first trigonometric function, the most basic one, say we are looking at sine function, sine of x. Assume this is the function. See, if you have sine x, the domain of sine x, say if you have y is equal to sine x. Alright. Now, x can be any real number, correct? Irrespective of what it is, positive, negative, 0, take any number. We have an output value, right? So, x, basically the domain of this one is set of all real numbers. Irrespective of what the value of x is, sine can take that value, x being a real number, right? When it comes to range, we have to be a little more careful about this. So, when we talk about the range, so take the sine graph. I know you guys know the sine graph. So what we have a graph which goes like this on the right, the positive side, and the same graph is going to go like this, correct, on the negative side. Now, maximum value is what? 1. And the least value what we have is -1. So, the range of this particular function, it varies from 1 to -1. Anything beyond that, you can never have it in a sine function, right? We all know this one. So, range of sine function is basically -1 to 1. Of course, both included. Same thing we have for cos. Same thing we have for all the 6 trigonometric functions. Make sense? So, as you can see here, see, this is the range and domain of all 6 trigonometric function. Now, if you're seeing in couple of functions, some of the functions, you see in the domain, we have a minus sign, correct? Even in the range also, we have a minus sign. The minus sign basically indicates that those values cannot be included in the set. Understood? Those values cannot be included in the set. We have to be very specific about it. So, these are the domain and range of all the trigonometric function. Now, inverse trigonometric function. For any inverse trigonometric function, again, we'll start with the most basic one, that is the sine inverse function. Suppose, say we have y is equal to sine inverse x. Sine inverse x. So, here, see, function, you guys know that function and inverse of a function, the domain and range will interchange, correct? Like the domain of a function is the range of the inverse function, or the range of a function is the domain of the inverse function. That means here what you are seeing, see this, the range is -1 to 1 and the domain is set of real numbers. This is for which function? Sin x. if we are doing sine inverse x, so my domain is going to become -1 to 1 and range is going to be a different value. Of course, it cannot be r, because when you say set of real numbers, even 100 is also included, right? That is never possible. So when you take sine inverse of x, what we get is, again, we have the domain for this function and we have the range for this particular function. Yeah, domain of ITF, inverse trigonometric function, sine inverse x, specifically speaking, the domain is from -1 to 1. Any value from -1 to 1. Whereas the range will change. The range will be just from -π/2 to π/2. You might be wondering only why from -π/2 to π/2. The answer to this particular question will become very clear in the next video, because we are looking at the graph of inverse trigonometric function. When we learn about the graph, it will become much more clear for you as to understand why it is only from here to here. Okay, for now, I'm going to keep that question as an open question. I'm not going to answer that for now, because if you see the next video, you will understand the reason for it. It will become very, very clear as to why the range is so much. So anyway, when you take the sine inverse function, the domain is -1 to 1. Basically, what we are trying to understand here is, see, the range becomes the domain. Alright, the range of the function becomes the domain of the inverse function. Alright, and this is true for every inverse trigonometric function, as what you can see in the table here. Look at the domain and range of each and every inverse trigonometric function. Alright, so what you're seeing now is basically the domain and range of inverse trigonometry, correct? Now look at this one. The domain and range of both function and its inverse, both are given to you. Now I want you to pause the video for some time, compare the domain and range. Because if you compare the domain and range, you will understand it in a lot more clearer way, right? Please go ahead, pause, try to understand the particular table. Now that you have understood how the relation between the inverse functions and its functions are there, this is the basic concept to understand an inverse trigonometric function. Because if you don't understand the relation between function and its inverse, it's going to be very hard to at least, intuitively understand how inverse trigonometric function works. Of course, formula is one method, but you need to understand the problem first. And this is how you do it. So in the next video, the most important question which we had this in this particular video, that is why the range of those inverse trigonometric function is limited. What is the reason behind it? That we will understand in the next video, that is the graph of inverse trigonometric functions.